So on my end, again, welcome to Archiving Silence for those of you that just joined us, which is a collaboration between Muslims in Canada Archives and Tamil Archive Project. What I wanted to also say thank you to is the people who are financially supporting this, the Ontario Trillium Foundation for Tamil Archive Project.
And on my end, SHRC, so the Muslims in Canada Archive, is supported in part by funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and we thank them very much. So we have this slide on the screen just to get to know everyone here. If you can at any point just include your preferred name, your pronouns, and answer one of these questions, that'd be really great for us to get to know who's here, for you to get to know each other as well.
This has been also one of the questions, the two questions that I posted in the chat have also been great questions of debate. Online, over 80 people responded to these questions. Mm-hmm. So we hope to kind of start inspiring you about thinking about archives, which is what we're going to be talking about. So I wanted to start with the land acknowledgement. The work that we do in Takaranto, which is also known as Toronto, we acknowledge that these are the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Chippewa, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit territory. We acknowledge also that this land has been stolen from its caretakers, and the facilitators acknowledge our own role as settlers in continuing the legacy of colonial violence and genocide. We also acknowledge that for some racialized non-Indigenous peoples, coming to Turtle Island was not a choice.
Okay, thank you, Vasuki. I want to also take a moment to welcome everyone to the event as well. So this is the overview of what we're going to be doing today. We'll start off with just introducing our separate organizations. We'll go over some house rules and for the event through a group agreement, and we'll go over what that is. We'll also, of course, introduce ourselves. I realize our names are on the little screens, but we haven't introduced ourselves just yet. Tonight's event is meant to be interactive. So the first activity will be a warm-up activity to kind of learn again who is in the space here today. And you'll also be able to kind of reflect on yourselves. Following that, we'll have a discussion about archives and archiving, its limits, the future of archives, and the future of archives of marginalized communities. From there, we'll do a short activity, which we're calling the photograph activity. And then we'll have a more open, we're calling it a Q&A, but it's more like an open space to discuss, and everybody can chime in then at that point. And of course, we want to, of course, emphasize that these community conversations are always ongoing and just and we don't stop at just one event.
So I'll introduce the collective that I'm part of, which I also started. That's Tamil Archive Project, which is composed of about 35 volunteers at the moment, who work in the areas of art, technology, archive, community events, and knowledge production. The reason that we came about is because the Tamil community itself has a traumatic point that has to do with archives. So in 1981, for instance, our archives were burned down, which were located also partly in the Jaffna Library, but also as people who have settled here as refugees and immigrants, we've recognizing that the archives don't necessarily represent our histories. And we would like to change that through the work that we do for the community, by the community.
So the Muslims in Canada Archive is a initiative that comes out of the Institute of Islamic Studies at the University of Toronto. So I like to say that we both provide a platform for the missing Muslim voices in Canada's archival record. One of the main reasons we came about, I think back in 2018, was a basically a bunch of Muslim organizations in Canada came together and realized that our voices weren't being heard and our histories were not being told. And they decided that they would support a archive project. And because of that, I came on board actually the following year in 2019. So we are both a physical and digital archive. We're still very new, so we're still working on receiving analog record donations and also digital records as well. But the main official sort of description is that we acquire, organize, preserve, and make accessible records of and about Canadian Muslim individuals and organizations. So our main purpose is to kind of to ensure the preservation of the history and documentary heritage of Muslims in Canada. And I myself and Emily, who's also on this on the Zoom here, are the two main folks that are involved in MiCA, and as well as, of course, our director, Anver Iman, who couldn't make it today.
So we wanted to also go over the group agreements, which may seem already very basic for everybody involved. Please do not take pictures of the screen or Zoom call because we think everybody's safety is our collective responsibility in this space. If you prefer or are using a reading device, we are happy to put the slide content in the chat, and we're also providing closed captioning. Thank you, Rain, for doing this for us. So in order for their closed captioning to be visible for you, please make sure that you just click on the 3 dots that are at the bottom right before the leave button so that you can enable and activate closed captioning. And we already went through point number 3.
So this is a moment where any of you can go ahead and add anything to our group agreement. So if there's anything that would make you feel more welcome in our space, and if you have any access needs, is there anything that we can support? So as I go through the rest of the group agreements, if there's anything that you'd like to add so far, please go ahead into the chat, and that will be part of our kind of communal group agreement going forward in this event. So this is a space for learning. We all come into it with different experiences and different kinds of knowledges. Please, of course, be respectful of how we treat each other, of course, and be kind to each other and to yourself. If we could just wait a few seconds if there's anything that anybody wants to add to the group agreement at this point.
And feel free to put anything that you'd like in the chat. So if you come up with a great extra point to put in the group agreements, please share it. We're always trying to make sure that we represent the best possible space that we can, given the limitations that we have online.
Yeah.
So something else that we also wanted to add is that it's quite important to us that people don't feel that they're just coming into an event and exiting. We are human beings, we exist, we're a volunteer collective on our end. and we continue to exist outside of Zoom. I know that sounds strange, but we do. So we want to make sure that if you do feel overwhelmed or triggered, we do have a breakout room, and we'd be more than happy to speak with you at the end of the event. Whichever event we have held in the past or holding now or in the future, we're more than happy to chat with you. So always feel free to reach out to us, and we'll hop online or we'll meet you for a coffee or whatnot, because that's part of the reason why we exist. And I think that human connection we don't want to lose, and the support, of course. Oh no, me again. Okay. So I should finally introduce myself.
Yeah.
My name is Vasuki Shanmuganathan. I am currently a research associate at the Center for Ethics at U of T. And as mentioned before, I'm also the co-founder of TAP. Usually the research that I do is at the intersections of race, colonialism, and health. And the dissertation I wrote also has to do with archives and the way in which colonial histories have also impacted South Asia, in particular Sri Lanka, and as well as Europe.
Okay, so my name was Moska Rokay. I am currently the Digital Humanities Research Fellow. Very fancy way of saying I'm kind of the archivist of MiCA, the Muslims in Canada Archives, which again is housed at the Institute of Islamic Studies at U of T. So my own professional interests lie in community-centered activist archives, especially of diaspora communities. And I finished my Master of Information at the University of Toronto, specifically focusing on archives and records management in 2019. Okay, so our first activity. So this is the word cloud activity. You've probably all hopefully have seen a word cloud before, but if not, it's basically it will be posed like a single question, and all you have to do is answer it with as many answers as you like. You'll be able to see everyone else's answers in real time, and if there are any repeats or similarities, for example, if 2 or more people answer similarly, that answer will get bigger on the screen. So I think we'll just go into it, and then you'll see exactly how it works. So Emily, if you can add the link to, so the link to the word cloud activity is there. All you have to do is answer this question. So which identity labels best describe you? So I'm even going to answer this as well. Let's go ahead. So I am Afghan. I also call myself Canadian. I also call myself cat lover, cat dash lover. And if you press refresh on that page, you can see everybody else's answers too. Oh, cool. Okay, so woman is getting, if anybody can see, Vasuki, can you see, you can see it? Okay, so that some of them are getting bigger. That means more people answered similar to you. So we can see there's a lot of folks that identify as women in the room, as well as Tamil. Ooh, educator, cool. Feel free to go crazy with this. I love word clouds.
We also wanted to ensure that it is interactive, because we want to get to know you better and who's in the room, and how this workshop can also be helpful to you. And so labels is one of the ways in which we identify ourselves, but we're curious to just find out how you identify yourself.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about this later too. We also have labels placed on us as well that are not our own. Oh, there's so many. Student. I wonder if I should, do you think it'd be a good idea to share my screen, or everybody can see the word cloud, right?
If a few of you could hit the emoji buttons to let us know that you can see the word clouds, that'd be great.
Yes. Okay. I see a one thumbs up.
Awesome.
2 thumbs up. 3. Okay, so people are seeing this. This is cool. Oh, so student just got bigger. I just noticed that. So every few students in the room. Artists got much, much bigger. So we have a couple of students in the room, some artists. So cool. Oh, when you hover over each word, it tells you how many people responded that with that word. I didn't know that. Should we give it one more minute? Okay.
And if you don't feel like submitting the answers here, feel free to take out a piece of paper and write them down for yourself. And you'll see why we're asking these questions.
Oh, there's a digital archivist in the room, another archivist. Okay, I think that's I think we've got a lot of responses here. I'll take a moment just to go over what everybody responded.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have, the largest ones, meaning again, the most people responded with that same word, that same label, are woman, Tamil, artist, student, cat lover, gay, and researcher. So the smaller ones again are likely folks that, responses that only had one person. So like refugee, child, educator, plant parent, unemployed, displaced, non-binary, archivist, that was me, digital archivist, Canadian, Tamil, I can't read that, Tamil, Dalit, lesbian, indenture descendant, Tibetan, telepathy fan. I think I'm not sure what that means. Cook, child of refugees, writer, Himalayan, foodie, created, and Afghan. That's probably me. Oh, oops. Sorry, I just moved quickly before So that was just an activity to, again, just like the earlier activity with the names and the 2 questions, just to understand who's here, to get you to kind of reflect on how you label, describe yourself, and how others do as well. And as you can see, there's some overlaps too, which was cool to see as well.
And also thinking about search terms. So when you do go in the archives, are these the labels that you want people to find you under? Are these the labels that you want your histories reflected in? So that's the reason why we kind of wanted to start this activity with like finding out more about you.
Yes, absolutely. Once your histories are being recorded somewhere, how are you found? How is your information found? And what labels are they under? Sorry. Do we want to go on to the discussion?
Yeah, so the way that we kind of planned the discussion was to have it back in
quote unquote.
Yes, and feel free to also put questions in the chat. We'll make sure to touch upon these. The reason for this is quite simple. We found this conversation itself would be quite interesting because we're doing archival work, but our approaches are vastly different. And so we wanted to give you an overview of what actually is a traditional archive versus a community archive. So Moska, can I ask you to explain, because you are someone who's a trained archivist, what is it that you define as the archive?
Okay, so I do want to mention that there's the traditional archive, and there's also the approach that's becoming a little bit more popular, I guess, or more popular, and the approach that I try to take within this traditional archival practice is it's a community archiving approach, but that will look vastly different than a boots on the ground, grassroots kind of community archiving approach. So but as a traditional archive, okay, it's like, I will say that it's very Western centric. It's very European centric. I don't want to go into our Archives 101, the history of way back when in the, I think it was like 1800s, when some of our traditional archival practices were made in France, no less. But a traditional archive is basically a space where documents, digital or analog, are housed for well, we don't want to say forever, because we don't want to make that promise, but in perpetuity, as far as, that's a very common word, as far as we can, as long as we can. I did want to share just like a very stereotypical photo of what folks usually think a traditional archivist is. I will have to stop sharing my screen here to do that, though. Just one moment while I figure out some technical. Okay. I think I can press new share. Okay. Can everyone see that? So generally, the kind of images we see is, I have a couple here. I couldn't open it up more because then it would make me pay for it or something like that. But generally, so when I searched in into Shutterstock archivist, so this came up, and this came up, and this came up, and basically it was a lot of old white men in like what looks like places with very, very little sunlight, kind of hunched over, very angry for some reason, with tons and tons of very unorganized paperwork everywhere. And as you can see, I'm not an old white man, but this is generally the kind of, I think, let me just change this back to our screen. Yeah, so those images, I like to show them because this seems to be what folks think archivists look like. I can tell you that it's not male dominated anymore, at least. But yes, generally people think a traditional archive is somewhere in a basement where there's tons and tons of boxes of records, and that they have traditional archival methods can be very extractive from communities, from people. They can be very they can be very extractive, and they don't often think of the subject or the person that they're attempting to, or the community that they're attempting to archive. It's always a very let's get as much as we can, and then the relationship with the subject is often ends there. Of course, in present day, there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of practice to not end relationships with communities, with records donors, and have a continuous participatory type of relationship. These are I wouldn't say very new, but maybe in the last decade, very common practice now. But unfortunately, a lot of communities, especially marginalized communities, have seen a lot of harm from the more traditional anthropological kind of extractive methods we see with archives, and of course some of the practices today still kind of exist. It's very structured. Sorry, I should mention, I that was incorrect. I don't mean that the practices, the extractive anthropological practices of the 1800s or something still exist, but I just mean the very structural kind of standard-based approach still exists. Where we have a standardized way of documenting your activities reflected in your records. There's processes, there's lots of paperwork involved, there's all these kinds of which we'll get to, kind of barriers involved, at least in my opinion, that may not work for some people, might not work for some communities, may actually push away a lot of communities, a lot of people as well. So now I want to pose it to you, Vasuki. What is the sort of grassroots community archiving work that and practice that you folks do over at TAPN that you put into practice?
Yeah, I also want to mention that Moska and myself are not necessarily on opposing sides of this.
Yes, yes, we're not. We're just kind of explaining the situation. Yes.
The reason why I said that our approaches are different is because Moska is working from within an institution, and Tamil Archive Project works outside institutions. And so that has to do with the history of the Tamil community, but I'm assuming there are also other racialized communities who probably have similar ways of collecting history. So I wasn't born in this country. I come from a tiny, tiny island off an island called Analadivu. And there the record keepers are older women and men and people. And so if you ever wanted to know the history of a village, of a person and whatnot, this is the person that you would go to. So there's a long tradition of oral historians that I grew up with. And then there's also the issue of missing archival records within the community itself because of war, and also racism and ethnic conflict on the island. And so when I came here, I expected lots of documentation. I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to go to the museum, I'm going to go to the archive and find my histories or the people that settled here. And unfortunately, I didn't. And so the reason why we started Tamil Archive Project isn't necessarily to be a standardized space for documentation. There are excellent organizations that are doing that. There is the Nulaham Foundation. For those of you that have not heard of them, they do a lot of work within the Tamil community in terms of standard archiving practices that you would see across museum spaces. Tamil Archive Project itself is a community archive. And so community archive, or the community turn in the archival community, is more recent. And the reason for it is quite simple. A lot of marginalized communities have not had access to be able to be represented in the archives. Oftentimes, communities are showcased as transient, or they'll return once whatever conflict is happening in their country is done. And so it's not seen as a community that has a deep history. It's seen as a community that is ahistorical to the mainstream Canadian narrative. So that's like one huge thing. The second thing was also that community archives could cross boundaries. So if, say, the ROM only had documents of, say, people who were importers of the 15th century Italy, a community archive currently, for instance, could be archiving zines that have been developed by various communities who were organizing around one issue. And so this, for me, is the most fascinating intersection, because archiving itself is a form of social activism, where you're refusing the absence in the archives by making your own documentation. And the wonderful thing is you get to choose what goes in the archive. And so when we asked you about the labels, cat lover, it could be that we find whoever is the cat lover in here, or there might be more than one person, that is the archive that you feel most, you have most material to contribute to. And so we might not find you in one archive, but we might find you in another archive. And so that's, I think, what is, there's a shift in the sense that community archives are also somewhat nomadic. They don't necessarily need a place in the sense of like a physical setting. And that also has to do with the onset of technology, enabling online archives, but also I'm sure most of you have gone to someone's home and they show you the vast collection of posters that maybe they collected. That's also an archive. And so it's enabled sort of new forms of space making that weren't possible before. I'll stop with that.
I did want to add that I absolutely forgot to explain what the approach MiCA kind of takes, and it as Vasuki mentioned, we are an archive within an institution, which is very different from TAP. We are within an institution, however, I've been trying to sort of use community archiving practice within an institution. There's not the same sort of freedoms as a community archive outside of institution that they can do versus us. There's still, we're kind of an interesting mix of both, where I do try to center the Canadian Muslim communities in everything. We do try to consult them in our policy making and our in our procedures as well, even down to our donation agreement. We've tried our best to respond after lots of great feedback from the community, tried our best to respond and change things, and, adapt to the community's needs, and I know, just like Vasuki mentioned it, this community turn is newer in the history of archives, but also a very important one. On from the Muslim perspective, we never saw much on Muslim history in Canada, but once we go into it, we see that Muslims have been in Canada since like the 1860s, before Canada became Canada, basically. We've been here. I say we because I identify as a Muslim myself. We've been here for a very long time, but because the Canada itself is historically very traditionally a Western Christian nation, majority Christian nation, our histories are not told in the same way, or they're not recorded in the same way, with the same sort of like vigor, I suppose. For example, Christian histories are found in a lot of churches and other similar kinds of organizations, faith-based organizations, keep Canada's kind of Christian history alive. And because we as Muslims, we are like a bit newer to Canada in comparison. Although I did say we've been here since the 1860s, the vast majority of us didn't come until after the 1960s. So the Christian history is a lot longer, but because we came a lot later, we haven't had the same amount of time to set up our archival institutions, Muslim-based archival institutions, as the Christian community has had. So this is where the gap we saw the gap, and this is the gap we're trying to fill here. So just okay, I'll stop there. I absolutely forgot to mention it earlier.
That's an important point. So in terms of barriers and walls, I can speak from my experience within the Tamil community. So the reason why Tamil Archive Project doesn't hold events and institutions is because the majority of Tamil people have barriers to education, and most people do not have a university or college degree. And so that space might be the very space that's keeping them out, because they might not feel comfortable accessing it. And so that's another reason why we are in the community rather than in an institutional space. But Moska, can I ask you, what are some of the barriers you faced in trying to establish the archive?
Well, because our archive is meant to kind of I often don't like to use the word capture. It's a very common word within. This is one barrier. Just literally the wording of what is common in our archival practice and archival policy documents even is to use this word capture. We often say that we try to capture the activities of a certain people or a certain group or a certain organization as an archive. I also don't like to use the word document either, because that becomes problematic as well. So it's very difficult, but okay, so I think I will use the word document instead of capture here, but we do try to document the activities of Muslims across Canada, but this label Muslim is it can cover so many people, so many different people that also refer to themselves with other labels as well, as in different ethnic groups, different language groups. There's different yeah, just so many different kind of sub labels as well. And not, I don't want to say sub labels, but other labels that folks can be as well as Muslim. So this is one very difficult issue, is trying to make sure that we also we're also not just like documenting like one single ethnicity, or we're making sure that we're capturing the diversity, or documenting the diversity of Muslims, and that can, and just to echo your point, that can vary by like ethnic group. For example, there are some ethnic groups that are very comfortable with the institution, like U of T. They're very comfortable with government-based, government-backed institutions like us, but there are a ton that are not. So there's always this kind of adapting, and like we have to be very flexible. And I kind of try to imagine it like water. We have to be very flexible and like move with the community. So I'm finding that we are always having to, I'm not complaining, because I understand the needs of the community. I'm trying to understand the needs of the community, but we're always adapting and changing. And I learn a lot from that too, although it is a barrier. One other thing, and I think you can probably speak to this as well, is trying to document the refugee experience. That is extremely difficult, because, as speaking as a refugee myself, this is one of my labels. We, like my family, came here with almost nothing to our name, and so there isn't much to document in terms of documenting my activities. What we do have is our oral histories. I can speak to my existence, I can speak to it, I can speak about it, but I don't have the physical proof, that very Western archival practice kind of needs, this like physical paper, or even digital at this point, of course. So how do we document these refugee stories, right? So that is one wall. These refugee communities, when they do have a few things, like for example, my family, they are not about to donate permanently their materials to any archive whatsoever, because when you do donate to a large, traditional archival institution, you're handing things over like forever. You're handing ownership over. There are some places that might, like for example, for us, we're trying to find ways to make sure that the records donor has ways of accessing the materials, or like maybe through copies, things like that, or we're trying to find ways of maybe looking at maybe accepting copies of originals, because just to add, archives typically want the original document and not any copies, right? So that is a barrier as well, especially since a lot of Muslims, like post 1980s-ish, because of a lot of Western intervention into countries around the world, especially Asian countries and the Middle East, have become refugees. So including my own family. So there's a large refugee population in the Muslim community as well. Are there any, so were you about to say something?
I wanted to echo the same sentiment. I myself, yeah, former refugee, and I don't actually have pictures. So there's a huge loss. But also what I've noticed is through the community archive, for instance, knowing that my friends have witnessed more of my history, it's kind of like a gap. So one of the barriers was also, so could I present an interconnected history? And I think that's what we also meant by this collective responsibility for us, because Moska isn't just someone who works at U of T, you're also a community organizer. I think the issue that we're facing is not just gap in material, it's also that the ways in which we've adapted to this loss of history has been to recognize other communities which are represented through neighbors or friends that have also been kind of responsible for witnessing our histories. And so with the Tamil Archive Project, for instance, Tamil is in the title. There's a lot of Tamil people there, but not everybody is Tamil. And the people that join often say, oh yeah, I grew up in Scarborough, my best friend is Tamil, and I want to make sure that her history is upheld. Or can you teach me how your community does archiving? Maybe I can adopt some of these things. So those are some of the ways in which we face barriers, but also I think it's time to acknowledge those ways in which we've adapted. Another barrier that you mentioned, and I think that one is probably the biggest one, is building trust in the community, especially even if it's your own community, takes a long time. And that has to also do with colonial trauma. If you are used to someone coming to your home and just basically taking things from you, be it through war, colonialism, military occupation and settlement, which is happening in my country, genocide, all these factor into the loss of trust, which also includes forced migration. And so when you come here with whatever little you have, you also have to rebuild trust. And that takes a really long time. And so that's also one of the things that is important to factor in. It isn't that people aren't willing to share. It isn't that people aren't willing to participate. Everybody sees the importance of it. But what people oftentimes in perhaps museums might not realize is documents and objects that might seem like historical to other people have incredible emotional meaning to the person who's holding them. And so that's one thing that's also important. And the other barrier I found as well, and I'm sure other people in the audience will probably have that experience too. It's very hard to write a history of a person in Canada without it being also a history that is a history of migration. So that is what people might say is transnational history or international history. And so traditionally it used to be, oh, here you are, this is your identity, this is what we're gonna do. But currently there's so many people that are moving about that history is also in and of itself part of that person. And that's hard to kind of pull apart and then neatly pack into an archive. I can't, it would be wonderful if we could get a shoebox and just be like, we'll put everything here and then, here's your archive. I'm pretty sure some of you have shoeboxes with things that you collect that are important to you. But that doesn't contain everything. But I'm curious because I wanted to ask you this thing with names. Because we came across this in both our communities. And I'm also wondering if people in the audience have a similar experience in your respective communities. Moska, did you want to say something about these names?
Yes, so I never really thought about it so specific, so deeply as I did just maybe not too long ago. But basically, okay, let me give some context. I have a book here with me with a lot of sticky notes. But in a previous event I hosted through MiCA, we had a book talk by a journalist and author named Murray Hogbin, who wrote a book focused on the very early Muslims into Canada. So these are folks that came before 1967, like as early as the 1890s, for example. And this is his book, and it just came out. It's called Minarets on the Horizon, Muslim pioneers in Canada. And so he interviewed folks, these very early Muslims when they, in the 1979. So at this point, a lot of these early Muslims were like in their 80s or 90s or something like that. So they had gone through a very, like a very rich and full life. And he noticed that a lot of them had Western sounding names. For example, Alex Hamilton, or so I think there was like a Mr. JC somewhere here as well. And he makes a point here in the book that when these folks came to Canada, of course, there were through ports back then, so a lot of so by boat. The immigration officials, a lot of them, it would always depend on the immigration official that you came across, but a lot of them decided that, you know, you're going to be living in Canada, and it's very hard to say your name or write it or spell it or anything like that. So you're going to change it to something that's more Canadian. And honestly, these folks that came, because they came so young, a lot of them came in their teens to flee conscription that was happening in the Middle East. And a lot of them, the first ones that came, for example, were like Lebanese Syrians. So a lot of them were trying to flee conscription and war that was happening over there. And they came to Canada, and their names just got erased, but and made into these random Western sounding names that was easier to spell. And that's literally the main reason for that. So for example, Saeed Muhammad Hijazi's name was changed to JC. Like that's it. And he just had to go with that. And we got somebody whose name was changed to Alex Hamilton, Joseph, Jim Walker's. Anyway, so a lot of these folks, their names changed, and because of that, there's a point that Murray makes in the book that because of that, when the folks died, or there was some sort of like their children were looking to find out their histories and things like that, they couldn't, because they couldn't make any links back to their homelands because their names had changed. So there's whole histories and whole connections, and their roots were cut off because these immigration officials decided that maybe it would be easier for them to live in Canada. I'm sure they were well intended. You know, it's probably easier for you to live in Canada if your name was changed. But I guess that nobody thought about the further repercussions, and these young people were not going to say no in front of this person that would either give them freedom to live in Canada or send them back and deport them back home. So they went along with it. And but just to add to that as well, there are some folks that did purposefully change their name to something more Western in order to fit in order to not face the racism that occurred at the time. So that's on my end, for Muslims anyway, that first came to Canada. And again, it's in this book. But I know that you have a point about names as well that you want to make. We've had a lot of these conversations before this event, folks. So this is why we know that we have points to make about certain interesting topics.
Yeah, I think the one that came up was also how much of your basic identification you have to change in order to enter the country. So be it your name, your date of birth. So those are two things that have radically changed what you can search for in the archives. Another one that I wanted to add to is, in the Tamil community, there's actually only one name. The last name was a colonial invention. And the last name that I have is my dad's first name. And so you can see, I'm not going to be able to go to ancestor.com, not that I recommend anyone does, but to type in any of these last names, you wouldn't be able to trace back that history. And the term that is also more preferred is living history, because so much of it depends on these shared knowledge access points that are people. in the community. And so that's a huge barrier to doing archival research, whether it be here or back home. Trying to trace a whole family record through a name won't work. It's as simple as that. And also for migration, some people did have to, for instance, add a second name. They've never had that experience. I remember being a translator when I lived in the UK, where I was in the social services office, and it was like we were 3 people. So the person that was in the social services office was someone whose heritage was from Jamaica. Her grandmother was from Jamaica, and she had settled there. I myself had been there as a student, and this third person who had just entered the country was from India, but from a very small village in the rural region, and there you didn't have it. And we all looked at each other and it's like, oh, isn't it funny? We're in the British Empire, and here we are with this bureaucratic issue. And what I found like a moment of really key resistance was this person, it's like, I don't have a last name, chose his mother's name. And so I was like quite fascinated by the fact that he made that decision right on the spot. It's like, I'm not adhering to the empire. I'm going to go with my mother's first name instead of my father's first name. So he may have changed the course of history on that day. What do you think, though, is like in your what you've seen so far? What do you think is the future of archives? Because there is actually more and more generations that are born here,
Yeah,
and that may not necessarily have access to previous histories, and also hopefully future generations that are a lot more critical also of existing archives and more perhaps informed. I can admit I did not think about archives when I was younger. I was fascinated by the ROM. Please don't quote me on this. I can't believe I'm saying this on record. But to me, it was like a very almost like naive, like, oh, this is so amazing. This is like the space where everybody's history is there. And then you go to grad school and you realize actually what's in the textbooks is a version of history. And oftentimes it's not a collective version of history. I, for instance, recently found out that so far it's always been, oh, there's immigration and there's refugees that have come to North America from Sri Lanka, but actually there's a record from 1800 of Tamil people in North America. Completely blew my mind. So I'm wondering, what are some of the sort of I suppose issues or hopes or challenges that you anticipate for the future?
well, in my own opinion, I think there is a lot of movement again to have these community-centered approaches in these larger archival institutions, and which is great, and it's it's a long time coming. Thank goodness for that. I just think that that approach definitely needs to continue, of course, but also that we need to learn from grassroots, archiving, archival initiatives, just like TAP, for example. I understand, of course, the hesitancy to connect with these large institutions, but that's on the larger archival institutions to create that trust with those community grassroots organizations, archival organizations, as initiatives. I think a lot of the work that needs to be done is on that, building those trust networks. I think, and I say this all the time, I think at every single event, that you can't build those those networks of trust if your archivists and your archival organizations are mostly white or just all white, especially at the in the decision-making spaces, decision-making positions. So we absolutely need to figure out, at least on the archival education, archival professional end, that we focus a lot more on getting basically getting BIPOC folks to get involved and get into and work at these larger archival organizations, and make sure that those organizations retain them, because unfortunately there's a lot of what's the word, like statistics, and yeah, there's a lot of statistics where a lot of these BIPOC archivists, such as myself, we come into the profession, we work, and we leave after a very short amount of time, because we're not respected in the same way. Our voices are not always heard. A lot of us, including, I can't speak for everyone, but for me especially, I want to work in these institutions so I can have these marginalized voices and these silenced voices heard in some way. And the approaches I want to take don't always align with the current practices, building trust with organizations, making sure we with communities, and making sure we center the community the way I believe should happen, and I believe the community needs. So I definitely, just to round off my points, there definitely needs to be more BIPOC archivists. And it's honestly, it's up to the archival educators to figure out a way to get us to work to get us in there. They need to talk to us to get us to become lifelong archivists, so that we can reshape these archival organizations and we can change them. And building communities, building networks of trust with grassroots community initiatives with other marginalized communities, and making that a priority as well, because I don't want it to be just like a one-time project, the side project, and then we're done with it as well. Maintaining those relationships of reciprocity, I think, are very important, and that's definitely the way this profession, in my opinion, needs to go in order to ensure that these silences and gaps in the archival record are don't exist anymore. Basically, that there are no silences or gaps anymore. Oh, sorry. So on your end, we are running a little bit behind on time, but if you can also answer your own question, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. There's two things that I wanted to mention. And so one I had mentioned before, which is rethink what you've been taught to be true about your own history, especially here on Turtle Island. So if people cite a particular date or whatnot, I've been proven wrong time and time again when I start piecing together different histories. Secondly, I also want to be very clear that Tamil is not monolithic by any means. And even the archives back home had silences and gaps. So communities such as the Muslim community, such as the Black community, even through angles such as class, caste, age, location, gender, all of these have also played a role in the exclusion from those archives, and as well as in Canada. So those are 2 points to keep in mind. I'm always approaching community projects, one, in collaboration with as many people from communities where they don't necessarily get representation or a voice. So that's one. And the second one is to constantly question what you're doing. And it's hopefully not causing you paralysis, but more in terms of, so how can I represent this better? And I'm going to leave you with the last point, and then I would love to do this picture activity with all of you. The last point is we actually did come across something that we wanted to archive and we couldn't. And so we had the title Archiving Silence with reason. And so it was a history that if we had archived it and if it was accessible, it could have had dangerous ramifications for that person's family back home. And so sometimes you have to ask yourself the question, is my need to archive this more important than what the consequence could be? And also, sometimes there are histories that will not be archived ever. And that is something that you kind of had to sit with. And I'm going to stop there.
Absolutely. Just to add to that point, yes, it's an important note to also make that everyone has a right to refuse to be archived as well, and everybody has a right also to be silent if they wish. And I think this hurried rush to document everything that we see a lot in some of these in traditional, old, very traditional archives, very traditional archival practices, older archival practices, is to hurry and rush and get everything. And sometimes people wonder, why don't you want to be archived? But it's just very important to remember that everyone has a right to be archived and not to be archived as well. So let's move on to I think there's a quote here that you added.
We can actually share those through our Instagram account because I kind of want to get to know our audience. And so we're hoping to at least give you an activity to get your own archive started, or at least get thinking about it. And you might be already doing this. So this is a short activity, might not take all 5 minutes, but if you could look around you or on your phone and find a photograph that is meaningful to you. So it can be on your desk, on the wall, in your wallet, wherever you keep photos. And if you feel comfortable, if you could share the image and tell us the story behind it. And so we're giving you some hints like date, time, weather, mood, food, clothing, people. So we'll give you a few minutes.
I just went to get mine, my own image.
If you'd like, you can give us a thumbs up if you are already sitting by your desk. Thank you, Krish. If it's okay with people, maybe you might feel more comfortable if I give an example. And then other people, if they'd like, can join in, or would anybody here like to go?
I think that means we should I have an example too.
Sure.
Do you want me to go first? Okay, so I have this, it's a little bit, I have this photo of myself in this, specifically in this frame, and that's its own kind of story. So this is a very old photo of me. Probably, I don't remember how old I was. I think I was maybe 4 or maybe 5 years old, and it was taken in, it looks like a professional photo studio, but it was taken in Germany. So before Canada, we lived in Germany. We attempted to seek asylum in Germany as refugees. Just long story short, they didn't end up accepting us, so we came to Canada. But when I did live there, I did go to school there, and they took a really great photos, like school photos of us, and they did whole photo shoot studios and stuff. So that's me, and so that's just me in a German photo studio, taking a photo for class for school, and I don't really remember the specific moment itself very much, but I do remember school very much, and I do remember enjoying it a lot. I specifically remember that whenever we had birthdays at in school, so this is, I guess, preschool or kindergarten, we got to wear a paper crown that a classmate would make for you, and you got to sit in the very, very front of the giant table that they would set up, and everybody would sing happy birthday to you in German. And then our teacher was really great, and she set up this sort of confetti thing that would fall from the sky for the birthday person. And the story of the the frame is the frame is much more recent, definitely from Canada, and it was I got it when I was a teenager. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I was obsessed with cats and like leopards and like panthers, anything cat related. I still love cats very much. So at that time, I would buy anything with this print. And including this, actually, it's a very soft, you can feel it's like a felt type of material. So it's not a kind of felt frame. So that's my image.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for just sharing that. That's a really great history. And also a great example. So I think oftentimes when people hear archives, they think to themselves, they look around the room and they're like, okay, this is going to be a multi-decade project of me taking pictures of everything and cataloging everything. And then the next minute you're like, I give up. Just kidding. But it can be as small as a photograph that you write a description of. So I'm wondering if anybody here would like to share theirs. And if you want, you can keep your camera off and just verbalize it if that feels more comfortable. Yes, please. Was it Magdalene? Oh, hi.
Hi. So what this is not a photo, but it's my maternal grandma's older sister. It's her citizenship card. So we call it an IC here, an identification card. And like it's the oldest thing I have of like my family. So this is can you see it? Yeah. This is what I have. And so you guys were talking just now about like names, right? Of like how Muslim names were like Christianized to be accepted in the archives, right? And to be accepted by Canadian Christian society. That also kind of happened with I'm of Tamil indentured descent from Malaysia. So what happened was a lot of the Tamil people, our names were like written Romanized wrongly because the people who were writing our documentations were non-Tamil, so they didn't know how phonetically it's said and how it would be then written down in Romanized. So for her, like her mom's name is was changed to something. Oh yeah, her mom's name is, I'm sorry, I mixed it up. Sorry, I'm a bit nervous, so I forgot what I was trying to say. But yeah, this was from 76, and I have her husband's card from 75. Yeah, and also this is something that's not archived, is a lot of Tamil men didn't allow their wives to get citizenships because they were afraid that their wives would run away if they were granted citizenship in Malaysia. So there was also that difficulty with that. And yeah, and that's what I wanted to share.
Thank you so much for sharing. That's so interesting. I never thought about, or I never knew about that side of that being another barrier. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I wanted to say, so I don't know if you can see it, but I mean, it's written in Malay. So it says that, so Bahawa Rangasamy, anak lelaki, son of Munisamy, seorang warga negara Malaysia, is a citizen of Malaysia, yang juga warga negara Singapura. So he is a citizen of, it's written, he's a citizen of Malaysia and Singapore. But this was after Singapore seceded in 63 or 65, they just crossed out, he is not anymore the citizen of Singapore. So it's just like straight up crossed out on like with pen. So that's kind of funny as well. Yeah.
Wow, that's such an incredible share. Thank you so much. I know, do you call it Adealata?
Yeah. In Tamil we say Adealata. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we do have only 2 minutes left. Vasuki, what do you think we should? We do have a few questions as well at the end. It's up to let's see what folks want to do. Is there other people that still want to share their photograph and story? If yes, please put your thumbs up or maybe right in the chat.
I'm happy to stick around. I thank you, Moska, also for flagging that. So for people who require closed caption, Rain leaves in exactly 30 seconds. Thank you, Rain, for providing closed caption. So if you do require closed caption, do let us know. But for those of you if you want to stick around and show an image, we're more than happy. I'm more than happy to stick around. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to ask those as well. Like we'll maybe go like 10 minutes over time.
Yeah, I could stay 10 minutes over. Yep. Does anybody have any of their photos that they want to share, the stories that they want to share?
I have another one. If that's okay to share. Okay.
Sure.
So it's
Please.
a book that I'm reading. It's called Chin Peng. This is the book, and it's about the communist guerrilla leader who fought an anti-imperialist war against the British. And like this is a, I'm sorry, it's so small, but it's like I forgot what it's called, but it was a monetary rewards for colonial authorities for providing information for leading communist leaders. So if you rat them out, you get like a reward, and it's written in Tamil. So that was like pretty cool. I don't know if it's like showing because the type is really small, but yeah. So all this text is in Tamil, and like it was like one of the few things that I could find that. Sorry, how do I? Yeah, it's one of the few things I can find because of during the emergency years from 48 to 60, there was a lot of like anti-imperialist communist activities that Tamils were leading themselves. And so there were a lot of text, communist text, and a lot of pamphlets that were written in Tamil. So this is like one of the few things I could find, and Tamil and Telugu as well. So yeah. And that archive, it is archived, but it's like really privatized. So like normal people like me can't like access it unless you're like a university student. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm blown away. I didn't even know this existed.
Oh,
That's so cool.
and one more is just this picture of my grandma and her neighbor. It's
Wow.
from, yeah. So this lady is my grandma. This is my Bati, and then this is her neighbor.
Yeah. Do you know what year that picture was taken?
It has to be. So my mom was born in 71, so this must be 70. Yeah, 70, 69. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing those.
Yeah, no problem. I wanted to also add, if that's okay, just I have some notes. So when you guys were talking about like archives, right? I mean, so about self-archival, I think TikTok, as like shitty as it is, there's a lot of like especially Tamil people, I feel like we're very like visual and like audio kind of people, because there's like a lot of like self-archival that happens in TikToks with among marginalized communities where like we're not historically like documented, but like in TikTok, because it's our phone and it's like our account, you can see so much of people's lives, especially like of indentured Tamil people here. Like I watched TikToks of them showing the estates that they grew up in, and the way that their grandmas cook their food, especially food. Like I think this is also like a global Tamil thing where you see like a lot of Tamil aunties are like cooking now, and they like post videos of them cooking, and it's kind of the same method of like putting a Tamil song over the cooking video, and it's the same thing, but it's really beautiful. And also there's a community of like Tamil aunties cooking on YouTube, and I think it's like, yeah, we're kind of cooking the same thing, but it's like so intimate, and it's so beautiful to see these women kind of doing these things by themselves, and also the various communities these women come from. And yeah, and also and we were talking about migration, one thing I wanted to say is a lot of Tamil migrant workers from Indian Tamil migrant workers that work in Malaysia and Singapore also use TikTok as a way of archiving their lives. Like they talk about their work situations, they talk about them missing their wives and their children, they talk about, there's a lot of like politics of like what they feel about Tamils living here, about Malaysian Tamils, like, and then there's a lot of like transnational casteism that comes about, and like it's really interesting to see as like when at the time when people can own their voices, like this is their account and they can post what they want. So and a lot of migrant workers use TikTok, like Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Nepalis, a lot of migrant workers in Malaysia use TikTok as a way of archiving their feelings and, you know, what do they feel about Malaysia, what do they feel about the food, and yeah, it's very yeah, that's, and also another community that does TikTok archival, I want to add, is trans women. A lot of Tamil trans women also use TikTok as a way of archiving their lives, their marriages, their love lives, and also using TikTok as a way of advocacy. And like also all of these people use Tamil as a spoken language, and so it's harder for this content to reach like English speakers. So like it's, if you're in a Tamil sphere, then you understand what's happening. So trans women use their platforms to like talk about transphobia, talk about like homophobia, and it's like really great to see. And like they talk about like their clothes and like what they want to wear, and like it's so beautiful to watch. And Tanuja Singham is Elam Tamil writer, and she's a trans girl who also has a YouTube channel. And a week ago, a Tamil trans woman from Malaysia passed away, and Tanuja actually did a video of it on her YouTube channel, archiving the life of the lost trans woman on her YouTube page. And she was, you know, reiterating that like it is important that I archive this because no one else will, and no one else will remember that this happened. So yeah, and I think like TikTok, and it's such a, not the whole of it, but there are like such interesting intimate things that happen on it. So that's, and also Instagram. Yeah.
Yes, I am so happy that you're mentioning this, because I forgot to talk about this. So most people assume that Instagram and TikTok and Facebook have memories and archives, because there's this fear of like, oh, everything that you post lives forever on the internet, but that's not true. So TikTok doesn't have a memory device. So you cannot find TikTok content with a Wayback Machine, which is the machine that documents websites. You cannot find Instagram content. So imagine a world where in 20 years, that entire content that people have created disappears and is inaccessible. And so what I would encourage people, if you do want to have a takeaway where you go ahead and impress everybody, is make sure you tell people to document or at least like record things on their own phones, back them up, put it on YouTube, put it on websites. If you are putting it on TikTok, if you are putting it on Instagram, download it. Because as you know, those popular social media apps are incredible, really incredible in being able to amplify voices. But they also write, we own this content. And they also write, like with Facebook, there are certain years you can't go back to anymore. And so I imagine people might not have like some of their pictures as a kid, because they only uploaded onto one platform. So I encourage everybody who's in attendance to spread that word, that you make sure that you have it saved on your computer or saved on the film roll and developed, and then you make sure you have copies, or that you have another way of keeping these records. So I'm glad that you mentioned that example of the YouTuber making sure it's on YouTube. So YouTube, for instance, has an archival function. that Instagram and TikTok don't, unfortunately. So thank you. Thank you also for the many great examples, because it's incredibly useful to also hear global perspective. Because Moska and myself are representing very much a North American based perspective based on where these archives are predominantly in operation at. I'm just wondering, for people in the room, like what kinds of archives are you in possession of, or what kinds of things do you get inspired by? Like how many of you use TikTok or Reels on Instagram as a way to learn more about your community? You can use the emoji button.
I mean, I certainly, for my own Afghan community, there are tons of pages on Instagram, on Twitter, that post a lot of wonderful content about, you know, my community, about our history, our culture. So definitely in my community as well.
Yeah. Also screenshots.
Yes.
I take so many screenshots. I also want to be mindful that thank you so much also for everybody coming to this event
Yes.
at a pivotal time, which is after work / dinner time for many.
Yes, that's true.
And so we want to make sure that we end on time. I do have a small feedback form if you are interested in filling it out. It is so that,
I can share the poll.
Oh, and thank you for sharing that answer. So when it comes to family history, photo albums, home videos, old Facebook photos and such, yeah.
So we do have some really quick questions here for to get your thoughts on today's session. I'm just going to launch a poll that will come up on your screen, and then you just can quickly answer. It'll take less than maybe a minute. Just let me know if you can see it. Everybody can see that. Yeah, okay, great. I'll leave that on for a minute or two. Yes, the form is online too. Thank you.
And also, if you have any more questions that you want to ask, please do feel free to write them in the chat. So for on our end on Tamil Archive Project, we have an Instagram account that's quite active in communicating through the stories. Thank you. And so we can make sure that people who are in this session who may think of a question to ask later on, that you have a chance to reach out.
Yes, please. So my email is there as well as the general MiCA email as well. If you have any questions for me or to the MiCA team as well, if you're interested in the Muslims in Canada archive. But of course, you know, I'm also available anytime as well to answer any questions or just to talk about archives, honestly. I love talking to people about archives. They come with such like awesome, fresh perspectives, and I learn so much. Just like even from here, from folks that shared today too.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say same here. I live, breathe, and love like talking about this. So
yeah,
you're not bothering any of us
exactly
more about it. If anything, we want to kind of make you feel like you can start your own archive or make it in a way that feels good for you in passing that on. Something that I also thought of, you know, as refugees, as former refugee myself.
Yes.
I have deep thoughts on what I can pass on to the next generation. Because oftentimes you see in these like stereotypical movies where it's like yeah, I have my great-great-great-grandma's jewelry,
Right.
dresses, and here is this like beautiful house that we just happen to have. Here you go. And I have, let's see, pictures of my food. I have books, and I have artwork that I can pass on that are probably a reflection of some of the things that interest me. So don't feel bad that you somehow are not documenting the great, the grandiose, the special. If anything, I hope you walk away from this workshop feeling like, oh yeah, you know what? Actually, the everyday is just as important. Pictures that I took of the TTC card changing over the years. Moska, you had mentioned also that you're collecting menus.
Yes, so menus of different restaurants. It seems like inconsequential, like, you know, for you now, but you never know in the future how valuable they could be to like your descendants, you know, your community. But yeah, menus. We talked about this before, the trading cards. So I have whole collections of my old Pokemon cards and other cards as well. So but yeah, like Vasuki said, like, you know, almost anything can be an archive, you know. Your everyday items are always have value because you how does it, because if it's valuable to you, it has value. You know, if it's you know, you don't let anybody else tell you that something doesn't or does have value, or doesn't have value. It's based on your own perspective. It's based on how you feel about that thing, and you can absolutely have a, you know, work on a personal archive, your own archive. And again, you can talk to us about that too outside of this event anytime. Oh, let me just share the results of the poll just real quickly.
And then we'll conclude this session.
Yes.
And then we'll all go and make our dinners and take pictures of it to make sure that we're archiving it. Thank you, everybody, for filling out the poll. It really helps us with this feedback because one of the things that we want to improve on is we deliver these workshops to various communities.
Yes. Great. I'll stop sharing that. And yeah, yes, again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, these are our connections, how you can connect with us. And thank you for staying until the end.